Hello and welcome to my video called Male Circumcision. It's time to stop. Now, this is not about circumcision of men 18 plus that are doing it on their own free will. No, I don't care about that. I care about involuntary male circumcision or infant circumcision. Um, so, what is circumcision? It's actually not the distance around a circle's edge, it's the removal of the foreskin. So, what is the foreskin then? A lot of people will tell you it's just a flap of skin, but it's actually a highly innervated and functional organ. So there's many functions of the foreskin. We'll just go over a few of them here. So the foreskin protects the glands of the flaccid penis. The foreskin covers the glands while the penis is flaccid to protect it from damage and from rubbing on abrasive agents like underwear. It prevents the gland from becoming keratinized or calloused, which reduces sensitivity. The glands is actually primarily an internal organ. The foreskin is constantly lubricating the glands with its mucous membrane. This aids smoother intercourse and improves sensitivity. The soft mucosa, or inner foreskin, contains its own immunological defense system, which produces plasma cells. These cells secrete immunoglobulin antibodies as well as antibacterial and antiviral proteins, including the pathogen-killing enzyme lysozyme. The foreskin facilitates the gliding movement of the skin of the penis up and down the penile shaft and over the glands during erection and sexual activity. According to intact men, this feels pretty good. Like, definitely not bad. So as far as sensitivity goes, the foreskin is the most nerve-rich part of the penis, containing up to 80% of the penis's nerve endings. And the foreskin is actually pretty big. It's a pretty big piece of skin. It's 12 to 15 square inches in an adult, about the size of a credit card. The male foreskin actually has specialized structures. The ridge band is a primary erogenous zone of the male body. This structure is extremely sensitive and is equipped with soft ridges which stimulate the female's inner labia and G-spot during intercourse. Ribbed condoms are actually an attempt to mimic this structure. An intact man can achieve an orgasm with just this part of his penis alone. The ridge band is removed during circumcision. The frenulum is another specialized structure that is a primary erogenous zone. The frenulum is a V-shaped tethering structure on the underside of the glands or head of the penis. The frenulum connects the ridge band to the glands. It is highly innervated and is another spot that an intact man can achieve orgasm from exclusively. The frenulum is most often removed in circumcision. The inner foreskin is smooth mucosal tissue that's just like the inside of your mouth. It is also highly innervated. It is designed to stimulate the glands while feeling slight variations in pressure and stretching, subtle variations in temperature, and fine gradations in texture. This is the structure that secretes the antibacterial agents and produces the lubricating fluid. This is removed in circumcision. The outer foreskin keeps the glands protected along with the inner foreskin. The outer foreskin facilitates intercourse by mitigating friction and acting as a gliding action bearing which retains sexual fluids and helps prevent painful intercourse. This is, of course, removed in circumcision. So you've probably heard that circumcision is like hygienic, it's, medically valid, it's clean. Well, not really. So if you just bop circumcision into a Google search, you will most likely find links to the American Academy of Pediatrics, the World Health Organization, WebMD, and other sites that claim that circumcision reduces the transmission of HIV by 60% and also reduces the risk of other STD transmission, reduces the risk of penile cancer, makes the penis easier to clean, reduces the risk of UTIs, and you can't get phimosis. They most often reference 3 African RCT trials for the proof of reduction of transmission of HIV. The thing to understand about those 3 trials is that the 60% reduction they report is actually a relative risk reduction and that the trials were extremely flawed. The absolute risk reduction was so small in each trial and the error so great that essentially no difference between the rate of HIV transmission between the group of circumcised men and intact men could be drawn. These same studies also seem to show an increase of male to female transmission of HIV. If it were true that circumcision reduced the risk of HIV, then logically the United States would have a low rate of HIV as most of the men here are circumcised. About 1 in 325 people in the USA have HIV. In the United Kingdom, where they rarely practice circumcision, about 1 in 651 people have HIV. This is almost exactly half of what it is here. In the United States, we also have an extremely high rate of pretty much every STD. So logically, circumcision doesn't prevent other STDs as well. What would prevent other STDs and HIV is just proper sex education, but we're just extremely against that here. We hate it. Also condoms, of course. So penile cancer is another big one that proponents of circumcision bring up. They say it reduces the risk of penile cancer. So the things to understand is the risk of penile cancer in a circumcised or intact male are both incredibly low already. About 1 in 100,000 men will get penile cancer. That's not a big enough risk that's being thwarted to justify the forced removal of a part of someone's genitals. It's unclear how circumcision really reduces this risk besides taking tissue that may at some point become cancerous, like any part of the body could, and removing it. Penile cancer also is almost exclusively found in senior citizens, so not infants. People will say the intact penis is harder to clean. They're not wrong, but that doesn't make circumcision right. Cleaning an intact adult's penis involves a quick pulling back of the foreskin and a little soap and water while in the shower. It's altogether not hard at all to do. Many parents think cleaning their intact child will be harder or that stuff may become trapped under the foreskin. This isn't true because the foreskin and glans penis are fused until puberty and sometimes until a person is 18. Nothing can get under it. American doctors regularly forcibly retract the foreskin before it can retract, which damages it and can cause problems later in life. Now, one of the big issues I have against this argument is that it basically takes the stance that men are so incredibly inept and stupid that they can't figure out how to clean their penis. UTIs are another big one that people that support circumcision like to throw out there. So the thing is, UTIs are not very common in infant boys, but circumcision has been shown to reduce the risk of an infant getting a UTI. They are less common in intact boys than they are in girls, and I think we can agree that nobody should be campaigning to cut girls if it were found to reduce the rate of UTIs, as UTIs can be very easily treated with antibiotics. It is true that circumcision reduces the rate of UTIs, but this is a relatively small and rare problem that is not reduced enough to warrant circumcision. Another point people like to bring up when justifying circumcision is that it reduces the risk of phimosis by basically 100%. So phimosis is basically a foreskin that's too tight to retract. There are many different treatments for it, some of which involve stretching the skin to accommodate, and some involve an incision, but rarely circumcision is needed. Being in a heavily genital cutting culture, American doctors are quick to suggest circumcision for this situation. Circumcision should be a last resort, as should cutting off any part of the body. Of course, if the foreskin is cut off, there is no chance of phimosis happening, so the people claiming that circumcision reduces the rate of phimosis are technically not wrong, but phimosis is rare to begin with. There are risks to circumcision. Yup, you won't find the risks and complications of circumcision unless you specifically search for them, it seems. We'll start off with bleeding. This is a direct quote from doctors opposing circumcision. The rate of bleeding complication varies widely depending on the study design and the definition of excessive bleeding. For example, in one prospective study, 9.87% of circumcisions resulted in abnormal bleeding, whereas a retrospective chart review found a rate of hemorrhage of 1%, and a database search found excessive bleeding in 0.083%. Okay, so we can see that this is definitely something that happens fairly commonly. It is the most common complication. There is an increased risk of bleeding when the infant has a blood clotting disorder, which aren't routinely tested for prior to circumcision. Obviously, if your kid is bleeding, it's going to need a revisit to the hospital, and there have been plenty of infants that have died from this. Infection is the second most common early complication of circumcision. G and Ansel reported an infection rate in newborns in the immediate post-circumcision period of 0.4%. Patel, reporting on a series of 100 consecutive circumcisions, found infection in 8 cases, or 8%, with one serious enough to require antibiotics and one progressing to fibrosis and phimosis. One case control study found that newborn boys diagnosed with a MRSA infection were 12.2 times more likely to have been circumcised than were the matching controls who did not have MRSA. So it seems to avoid UTIs by circumcising, you effectively open up the opportunity for much more threatening infections, as infants die from these infections every year. With circumcision, there is an extreme amount of pain. Anesthetics or anesthesia was not commonly used until very recently, and even with anesthetics, the level of pain is very high. More effective anesthetics can't be used because of the risk they pose to an infant. Doctors will tell you that the procedure is not painful, but this is a bold-faced lie. It's the excision of the most sensitive part of the body. Of course, it is going to be extremely painful. There has been little to no research on the neurological and psychological effects this level of pain or trauma has on a person long term. Another fantastic complication of circumcision is when too much skin is removed. Removing too much skin causes a partial or total denudation of the penile shaft, which in layman's terms basically means the penis is skinned. There's no skin on it. Corrective surgery, including skin grafting, can be required. Removal of too much skin can cause tight and painful erections later in life, or pulling the scrotal tissue onto the shaft due to excess tension on the penile skin sheath. Damage to the urethra can be caused by improper placement of circumcision tools. An infant's penis is very small, and surgeons mess up, which can result in a glands being cut in half. This is usually during the dorsal slit. They misplace the scissors, and they basically just cut the end of a baby's penis in half, like lengthwise. It's not very good. So partial or complete loss of the glands or penis doesn't happen very often, but does happen. Obviously, this is a horrific complication and will indefinitely affect a man throughout his life. So this is what you're risking in circumcision. You're guaranteeing a loss of sensitivity, a loss of sexual pleasure, and you're risking a complete loss of the entire organ. That's what you're doing. And the reason you're doing that is for no good reason at all. There's no medical reason that makes this necessary. So the sad part about this video is I've been talking for 11 minutes and I haven't even gotten really into the complications that much. I just skimmed over them. There's so much more disgusting complications and horrific complications that are long-term and short-term that I just haven't had the time to go into on this video. So to get a more encompassing view of what circumcision is, its history, its complications, what doctors think about it, I would encourage you to look up American Circumcision, the documentary. It's on Netflix. I think it's on Amazon Prime as well. You should also look up Sex and Circumcision, An American Love Story by Eric Klopper. That's on YouTube. It's like a stage presentation. It's very good. And also look up Dr. Money and the Boy with No Penis. It's about David Reimer, who lost his penis to circumcision. And they basically tried to do a gender reassignment surgery on him, and he didn't take it. He always felt like a man. So yeah, that's like information and then tragedy. I'd also encourage you to look up, if you can stomach it, just a video of a circumcision. It's pretty horrific, to be honest. And if you can stomach that, then go ahead and look up botched circumcision on DuckDuckGo or Google or whatever, and just look at the results of what this does to people. All right, that's the conclusion of my video. You all have a wonderful night, wonderful day, wonderful week, whatever you please.